Welcome. We're talking Colorado. If you've been following the news, you're thinking, oh, realignment stuff. Well, not that Colorado yet, because we don't really know what's happening with them quite yet as we sit here on Tuesday afternoon. But David Ubbin and Ari Wasserman had a really interesting conversation recently about Deion Sanders in Colorado. I know what you're thinking. Deion Sanders? An interesting conversation? For sure. But David was on vacation when Deion made the comments on the Rich Eisen show about I want a quarterback from a two-parent family, but I want a D lineman from a single mom and all that. And very interesting thoughts from these two. And it got us thinking, like, we need to have this conversation because Deion always says the quiet part out loud over and over and over and over and over again. He says things that coaches say pretty frequently behind closed doors, but he says them in front of microphones. And so, guys, I'm going to let you guys have the floor and just tell us what you guys were talking about so we can all get in on this conversation.
Ari?
Yeah, I mean, I cover recruiting for The Athletic, and he is like the Deion guy at The Athletic. So when he said this stuff, I just called him informally to discuss what we should do about it, if anything, and it turned into a 20-minute conversation on the phone about, how big of a deal is this? What does it say about Deion? The interesting dynamic between being the savior or the viewed as the savior of HBCUs to saying things that are insensitive to the community that HBCUs matter to the most. And just in general, like what this means.
Insensitive to most communities if you want to take it that way. So.
Well, sure. And it's like, the other thing too that he said, and I don't know if you have the clip on this too, about he said one other thing, Dave, that just escaped my mind for some reason.
Do you guys want to hear the Rich Eisen clip to refresh?
Let's do it.
This is Deion on Rich Eisen.
I remember the thing that he said too, and I don't know if he said it on Rich Eisen. You play it, and if he doesn't, then I'll say it.
Okay, all right, sure. All right, this is Deion on Rich Eisen. I believe it was Super Bowl week.
Can you tell who that is just by talking to him now that you're walking in the living rooms and you're seeing more and more and more?
We have different attributes: smart, tough, fast, disciplined with character.
Yep.
We're looking at now quarterbacks are different.
Yeah.
We want mother, father, dual parent.
Mm-hmm.
We want that kid to be 3, 5 and up because he's got to be smart.
Mm-hmm.
Not bad decisions off the field at all,
Mm-hmm.
because he has to be a leader of men. It's so many different attributes in what we look for when we see a quarterback. And you would love a coach's son. Somewhere that the coaches coached him, and I'm not going down my road. I see you smiling because
I know who your quarterback is right now.
He's talking about my son. I didn't just build a template for my son, but that's what really we look for in quarterbacks. Different positions are different. Like O lineman, I look for dual parent homes,
right?
A strong father that they adhered to,
right?
Smart kid, at least 3.3. and above.
You're also describing Hurts.
Yeah, tough.
Well. I mean,
physical. I mean, offensive lineman. Defensive lineman is totally opposite.
What do you mean?
Single mama. Trying to get it. He's on free lunch. I mean, I'm talking about just trying to make it. He trying to rescue mama. Like mama barely made the flight.
Trying to get out the mud.
And I want him to just go get it. It's a whole different attributes that you look for in different positions, and we have that stuff just chronicled. We know what we want, and we go get it.
The context of that is they were right before we're talking about Jalen Hurts, who was about to play in the Super Bowl, who comes from a two-parent family, who is a coach's son, all that stuff. So, Ari, was the thing you were thinking of in there or not?
Mm-mm. He also was talking about Boulder, and I think there were two different interviews.
Maybe he talked about Boulder in that clip too.
He talked about Boulder and how he said, it's so nice to be in a place that doesn't have a very strong police presence. He's like, I haven't seen a police officer since I got here. I had to pull one over myself. He said, I pulled him over, and it just kind of like, I don't know if it was just me, Dave, and you correct me, but it just seemed like kind of mean to Jackson State and the community that, and you sent me something that Bomani Jones said, which we can get into too, about, everybody talks about the funding issues and, the facilities and the issues that HBCUs have, but nobody ever discusses what they've done for the people that went there. It's like Deion Sanders has indirectly torn down Jackson State since he left there without ever really acknowledging what Jackson State did in terms of providing him a platform to be qualified for this job.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is just like a lot of this is unnecessary. I think that's where I kind of land on this and maybe oversimplified because, Andy, you alluded to it to start the show. The traits that they're talking about are a lot of things that I would say a vast majority of coaches would probably agree with him on. But there's a line in between when you're starting to describe that. Okay.
Can you imagine Nick Saban saying that? That's the thing.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we're talking about is that you risk alienating people. From a pragmatic perspective, you risk alienating people who you're probably going to have to try to recruit in the future. Now, for me, I look at it this way. Okay. When you're running down that list of things, there's a list of things that the player can control. Doesn't make a lot of mistakes. Their GPA, how much do they love football? I forget what any other things said. There's a lot of things that the players can control.
Well, how driven they are in general, which is the implication of the whole thing. Yeah.
1-parent household, 2-parent household, how much money your family has. The player doesn't control that. And that's where it steeps over into like unnecessary. And then I think you risk that, at the end of the day, we're talking about stereotyping. Is a lot of those things that he said generally true? If you pay any attention to the demographics of college football, I mean, it's more true than not true, I guess. But there's so many exceptions to both of those rules that it's kind of like, what are we even doing?
Also, too, like if Malachi Nelson was from a single parent home, would they not recruit him?
Yeah, exactly.
I think they'd take him. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
but here's the thing that I found interesting. I was talking to some people at the combine, and this topic came up, and it was like, hey, every scout in America says all that same stuff, like all of them, and it's just like, well, yeah, you're probably right, and like you said, Ari, all the coaches say that too. Behind closed doors.
Well, the thing that I think is interesting here is, I'm not somebody who gets wound up when people say things. Lord knows I've said things on the show that I probably shouldn't have said. But I think it is an interesting dynamic to look at just like who Deion is and like what drives Deion. And I don't necessarily think that the thought that we had about him while he was at Jackson State about being the savior or the person who brings back HBCUs was ever really the thing for him.
He never said it. I mean, he
tried, no, I know.
He tried to make things better for HBCUs while he was there, but
which is the way that you have to approach that job.
It was clear that he was trying to get a Power 5 job, like just like any other coach who coaches. That part I don't get. Like criticizing him because he went to Jackson State and didn't stay at Jackson State for 50 years. Like, what did you want him to do? He wants to be a coach. I think
a lot of the criticism came from just like there's a line between being loyal for who is signing your checks and saying like when he's talking about being called here and I feel like I want to be here to like I don't think he ever used the term saver of HBCUs, but like I don't think he was running from that perception. And when you're selling that on the recruiting trail,
he did try to make it better. He brought in more money.
But I think when you're selling that on the recruiting trail and you bring Travis Hunter and all these guys, and then a year later you're taking Travis Hunter away and you're bringing guys with him, I can't blame him. Like any coach that's worth their salt is obviously going to do that, and you're going to make things better as best as they can be for whoever is signing your checks. That's the coaching profession is largely a group of hired mercenaries to do that. But it's like
Jackson State. They're both.
What'd you say?
What if you teach Chattanooga instead of Jackson State?
Well, but that's kind of what we're talking about. Like when you're specifically talking about HBCUs and all the challenges that HBCUs face, and the reasons why some of those challenges are there. I don't consider myself a scholar of HBCUs. I understand a little bit of it. I didn't go to one. I don't, I'm not like super well versed in all of the things that make things in life difficult for places there. But I just, it's just the whole thing is kind of odd to me more than anything else.
Well, here's something that interesting that happened to me, guys. And I'll never forget it. But the day that Travis Hunter signed with Jackson State, I tweeted out that to me made Deion Sanders a candidate for Power 5 jobs. That one thing that he did alone.
Oh, yeah.
If you could
I actually
convince
agree
the
with you,
number
yes.
one player in the country to go to a HBCU over Georgia and Alabama and everywhere else he had offers from, then you can recruit with anybody at any level. And I tweeted that out, and there was a large uproar from a certain pocket of the Twitter HBCU supporting community about how I'm racially insensitive, how I'm trying to take something away from the HBCU community, how Deion Sanders is two toes down or 2 feet down on building the HBCUs back up. And there is a large segment of the population who bought into Deion Sanders, the HBCU savior, not Deion Sanders. I'm climbing the professional ladder.
They made that up themselves. Deion,
yeah, and I'm not blaming him.
He wasn't running from it, though. Let's be honest, he wasn't running from it.
I also don't blame him for not running for it, because the only way that you can be successful at Jackson State is by embracing that.
Yeah, this
is
no different from the coach who's a coach at USF who's like, well, I've always wanted to coach at USF. It's my dream job. But then if Alabama,
it's kind of different though, Andy. It's kind of different though. Like there is certainly in the way that like race and like the social climate of America is talked about. Like this is always going to be a hot button.
But here's the thing.
More so now.
You're right about that.
HBCU versus USF.
But you're right about that. But also what Ari said, and Ari, I don't want to put words in your mouth. But again, if Deion had been coaching Chattanooga instead of Jackson State and landed the number one recruit in the country, you would have said the same thing.
That's true.
That would make him a candidate for any Power 5 job.
Yeah. And it's like, I wasn't coming like at it from a racial standpoint. I was just making a comment on how well he recruited.
It could have been any non-Power 5 school.
Yeah, right.
It could have been any non-Power 5 school, and you just said the same thing.
But it gave me a key into how much Deion Sanders meant to a lot of people for a different reason. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And when he is in this scenario now, whether or not it was ever his intention to be the savior of HBCUs is kind of irrelevant. I think what he sold to these people and telling them how much he cares and how much he sympathizes with that as a problem and wanting to fix it. And he did make strides in fixing it. But the second you go to Colorado, which is in the whitest area of the country, and start making fun of the police presence in Jackson, it's like, that's like the exact opposite of what you were working for there. And it's I'm not
talking about Jackson, or was he talking about all the places he's lived?
My understanding
he lives in like suburban Dallas.
Jackson.
He spent most of his time in suburban Dallas.
Well, he's also grew up in Fort Myers. So that's the thing. All of this stuff is stuff a coach who is at a job who wants a bigger job would do. Every coach who's at a job who wants a bigger job acts like the job they have is the greatest job ever. It's the greatest school ever. It's the greatest place ever, and he wants to be there forever. When we all know it's not true. Why is he any different? Why is it different?
I think because
99% of the time that happens, there's no racial undertones to that.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest part of it, is like wanting to save. Well, we'll stop using the word save, but wanting to help USF grow or UT Chattanooga grow is different than going to guys and saying, because you forget too, a lot of this was on the back of like the George Floyd thing where people are like, what can we do to help? And he's sort of strumming that guitar saying, hey, let's go build up HBCUs. Let's get all this talent down here. And so like, I get where they're coming from, but I think like, I just land with, I get like from the pragmatic sense, Andy, you're right. But I kind of get where Ari's coming from. For me, it just feels unnecessary to even really be talking about a lot of this.
But what was the reason why Travis Hunter went to Jackson State? Was it simply to go play for Deion?
Yeah,
because that's not what he said in a lot of the interviews after it happened.
Well,
he went for Deion. If Deion hadn't been there, he'd be at Florida State right now.
Yeah.
He went for Deion.
Well, it's to play for Deion and to be developed by the greatest corner that's ever lived, but also to share in that vision. Like, I would be shocked if he didn't care about that. I'm sure there was a sliver of, hey, I want to be the first person to do something. When I interviewed him while he was committed to Florida State and wrote a big feature on him, even before Jackson State was even a possibility, he talked about wanting to forge his own path and to go somewhere different that, he could, do something and be the leader, So I think that when you combine, playing for Deion Sanders, which is something that is going to be highly attractive to a lot of young men, there's also got to be some sort of pool of I'm going to do this for HBCUs, and I want to be the first person that says, hey, it's okay to go to a place, and it doesn't have to have the best locker rooms, and it doesn't have to have waterfalls in the facility for me to be successful there, and the second that, it's just like really ironic that the place that Deion ended up going to, and it wasn't by design, it was just one of the Power 5 places that wanted him, is probably the most polar opposite Power 5 program that you could even come up with from Jackson State, right? Like it's not even the same.
Let's not besmirch Stanford, Ari.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yes. I mean, would Colorado be in the top 5 though of most Power 5 schools from Jackson? So
I would say so.
It's just like, to me, it's like, I'm not angry or upset. I don't blame Deion for doing anything that he did. I'm not trying to be, drum up drama. I just don't know. And I think the way that you put it, Dave, when you said it just seems like unnecessary. And it's like, I think that he could still do good for HBCUs, even though he's not there, by talking them up or by encouraging other people to recognize what that place did for him, rather than there's so many cop cars in Jackson and there's not I had to pull one over in Colorado. It's like, it seems like you're so happy to get away from that when you're supposed to be the number one supporter of it.
Well, no, he's supposed to make Colorado and Boulder sound like the greatest place in the world because that is now his job.
Yeah.
Like, again, we wouldn't be criticizing any of this had he gone from some other FCS school. If you've gone from Montana State to Colorado, like, it's because of that. But the part of it where he says the quiet part out loud, I think is fascinating, because I think Deion, more so than any other coach, which is crazy because he just started coaching, not very long ago.
Like 3 years ago at a college level, yeah.
Right. He has moved into the Howard Stern arena of nothing he says will shock anyone. He can say anything he wants and it will not shock. Like,
how much do you think that's part of the strategy? Because it felt like early on, Harbaugh was almost taking a similar approach, and then he stopped. They weren't having a lot of success on the field, and I think he saw it wasn't helping them. Deion, there's no question that it helps raise his profile right now, and I don't know that we have any piece of evidence to suggest that this is hurting him in a way that matters. Like, you think about the thing at SWAC Media Day a couple of years ago, or the thing with the he, after the first game, he thought people stole a bunch of stuff out of the locker room. All this sort of noise hasn't affected really anything, like, at all.
No, and it's interesting because Nick Saban, again, I'll bring back, if Nick Saban had said the stuff about 2-parent, single mom, all that, the volume of think pieces that would have been written about those statements.
Shout out to The Atlantic.
There are people from
We're The Athletic, by the way. The Atlantic would have chimed in on that one.
Yeah.
There are all sorts of people who come from a single family home or single parent home. Sorry. It doesn't matter where you're from. Yeah.
For a while, me.
But there is a certain undertone to the way that it is said that is racially charged, right? Like there's a certain, implication there that, people will take from it. And I don't think that a white person could ever say that, regardless of whether or not they are thinking that when they're recruiting or whatever. I just don't know, too. It's like how much I even buy into the concept of a person from a single family home that's a lower income is going to be more driven than a quarterback who comes from 2 parents who wants to make it to the NFL.
Yeah, like, I think there's a level of speciousness to it where it makes sense on paper, but then when you actually get in and talk to players and stuff, I don't know how much of that is actually
like you're a defensive lineman and you're better because you came from a low income family. So
right.
You're going to be better at sacking the quarterback.
It doesn't seem to follow the same rhyme or reason in real life. Like, you'll meet people who are just absolute dogs on the field in the weight room, and you find out that they're loaded.
That's a dentist.
Grew up in with every manner of privilege, but that's just who they are. And or you'll find guys that came from not as much of a not a good background, and they don't have that same motive. They're not as motivated as the other person is on the field, just because they aren't. That's just not who they are. So,
or not physically gifted.
Physically gifted, that's also another. We can get into other stereotypes too, but you're right. I mean, it's a very interesting thing though that he's gotten to that point, and I'm really fascinated to see where he goes from here with that, because again, he, unlike any other coach in America, can say whatever he wants.
Mm-hmm.
We won't be shocked, but we will repeat it and we will talk about it. Here we are in the middle of the offseason talking about Deion Sanders because we know that you're going to listen to this episode and you'll engage with it and you'll be interested by it because he moves the needle.
Well, and I come back to this though, Andy, at the end of the day, this is a results business. And right now, based on what he did at Jackson State, was put up incredible results. And that's a lot of the reason why he gets the license to say whatever he wants. I go back to a guy who once called his current roster a pile of crap at Big 12 Media Day.
Yes, I was there.
He did not. Yes, I was also there. I was in the hall actually when he said that, but I obviously was at the event.
I was sitting there and I'm like, that sounds awfully honest, but also not something I'd say out loud.
Yes, he doesn't get the benefit of the doubt because there were a lot of questions about him already coming into Kansas.
Yeah.
That didn't end well at Notre Dame. We had seen him fail, and that did not go well for him, obviously, at Kansas. But right now, if you're looking for negatives for Deion Sanders, things to poke at for him as a college coach, you basically have what? Zero? Nothing. What he has done has been unbelievable.
Yeah.
And that, I think, lends itself to why
Buddy
he is
Pugh
sort of into
Buddy
Howard
Pugh in
Stern's
South
side.
Carolina State took it to him in that Celebration Bowl after the 21 season.
Sure. But that's
that's just my Buddy Pugh shout out. If you don't know who Buddy Pugh is, you talk really good HBCU coaches. He's one of them. So if you don't know, just read up on Buddy Pugh. He's a good dude.
Andy, I missed my opportunity to give my guy Rusty Wright a shout out when we were talking so deeply about Chattanooga this week.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
so I think that's where we, that I think that's a huge part of it is, it's like, what is it I'm thinking of? I think this is from Parks and Rec. I can't remember, or maybe it's from The Office, but it's like, well, if you say that this is not how a good college football coach acts, well, I'm a good college football coach and I'm saying this and acting this way. So apparently it is. It's one of those things where it's like, that's just how this is going to go.
The thing is that, and there's a few people here that are listening that are like, why can't it just be a funny joke and leave it at that without subtexts? It's like, I'm not outraged. I'm not trying to be, cancel this guy. Like, I'm not like in that mode. I just think it's a very interesting thing when we're trying to reprogram how he is perceived by most of the people who follow the sport.
Well,
like, I think people
it's clearly a strategy on his part. Like, what he's doing is on purpose. And that's why we're talking about it. It's not like he's just making an offhand comment. Like, he knows this is a very smart person who is very media savvy, understands.
I don't say this with a negative connotation, but extremely calculated. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah. And the thing that's so funny about the whole comment is it's not even true. Like, he wouldn't even follow that criteria on his own if it meant getting a good player. There are plenty of 5-star quarterbacks that are going to be coming through the ranks that come from a single parent home that they would take in a heartbeat. And there's probably plenty of defensive linemen that went to private school that he'd love to have on his roster. And, it's just kind of like, at the end of the day, it's always about how do you get the best players and the most good players on your team that you possibly can get, and backgrounds, I think, will probably end up taking a second fiddle to how good they are as a football player. And that's kind of how it goes. So, it just, to me, it's like, we have to remember that Deion Sanders is not, anything other than a football coach. He's a very good football coach so far, and I'm excited to see where it goes with Colorado. But like, he is a driven man who wants to win at the highest level, get the best possible players, and either parlay that into, a career at Colorado where he can continue to do this, or get a better job down the road. And that's who he is. He's not, I'm doing this for, any community. I'm doing this for any, subsect of colleges. He's doing it for himself. And I think Deion Sanders, am I allowed to say this? Is like, he's all about Deion, and like, that's okay. There's a lot of coaches who are all about themselves. And that's just kind of what the next step is going to be for how he's perceived me.
Now, the question is, what conference is Deion going to spend most of his time in at Colorado? Because there was a board meeting of the Colorado Board of Regents on Tuesday morning. That was it was legal advice on a specific matter and an athletics update on the Pac-12. And that's all they said. It's executive session, so they don't have to tell anybody what they talked about. It's not anything that's coming up for a vote because votes have to be public. But what do you think that means?
I think, to quote Jack Shepard, Andy, I believe the thought is that we have to go back. We have to go back.
I didn't think you. For some reason, I thought you were going to talk about Jack Shepard as like some professor emeritus at Colorado, and I was like, he can't be talking about the doctor on Lost. Talking to Evangeline Lilly.
Alcohol-dependent son of a abusive father, doctor / magic man /
We have to go back. I will say,
Listen,
as a loyal viewer of that show, I think I dropped the cup I was holding when he said that.
One of the great TV moments, even though the last couple seasons of the show are absolute trash. But
yeah,
Andy, I just have to laugh because everyone is just so nakedly chasing the money. And I remember when they left, it was like, well, the Big 12's not, on solid footing. We have to get back to our alumni base in California. It'll be better for us because I think outside of Colorado, I believe the largest base of donors and alumni for Colorado is in California, more so than Texas. And so it is very funny to watch schools just chase the money, but it is what it is. Like, I think everyone wants to pretend like realignment, and I've started calling it consolidation at this point. Colorado probably not going to make that cut ultimately. Yeah. But everyone wants to say it's about all these different things and academic association.
It's a 100-year decision, Dave. This would put the light of the 100-year decision, by the way.
Yeah, if this happens, it would be precisely, if I recall, a 14-year decision, I believe, to leave the Big 12.
Oh, my mistake. I think I accidentally said Tuesday when I was talking about the Board of Regents. It's Wednesday morning is the Board of Regents meeting.
So, it is what it is. Whatever. We all know why these moves happen. And it's just funny when we have one of these moves that is probably going to be undone very quickly. And we'll see. There's still a lot of pieces to fall and a lot of people saying conflicting things and a lot of people. And there's still the biggest variable, obviously, is the Pac-12 media deal. We don't know what's actually going to happen there.
I still think people don't actually want to go. In most of these cases, nobody actually wants to move. They get forced. They get to a point where they can't really make another decision, and so it feels to me like most of the Pac-12 members would like to stay in the Pac-12 if they can. And
there's got to be a moment where you look in the mirror and know that you are in danger of being one of the leftovers. And that's when you use the word consolidation. And I think I made this point on the podcast that ran on Tuesday, but the short-term boost that you might get from the Big 12, assuming that they've got a better television contract with equal revenue share, is good. But I think the bigger benefit than the short-term paychecks is attaching yourself to a conference that is growing and not being depleted, in the sense that you don't want to end up in a position where you're just kind of left out into the dust, So if I were in charge of a school, I would look in the mirror and say, are we a commodity that people want to have, or do we want to latch on to something or someone or somewhere that preserves our money generating ability and our relevance, just based on happenstance of where we were at the time? It's like, you look at all the teams in the SEC and the Big Ten that are just like, they're on the train right now. They're happy. They're on the money. They're on the money bus. And it's like, Purdue doesn't have to be in the Big Ten. Indiana doesn't have to be in the Big Ten, right? How many teams
that's
in
what
the
everybody
Big Ten?
says is the next step. When the next set of contracts, when the SEC contracts are finally up, that they'll all figure it out and they'll just cut the ones at the bottom. I don't necessarily believe that'll happen, but it is interesting to think about.
I think the best way to put it is I think I'm with you, Andy. But in the same breath, if I was a president or an administrator at a Rutgers or at a Vanderbilt, I'd be super nervous.
Yeah. I would be sending all the gifts to
yes.
Well, they're going to at least be on the money train for another
to the Georgia people,
for
to
a
the
while,
LSU people, to the Michigan and Ohio State people. Hey, remember your old pals in Piscataway?
I think my main fear, Andy, with all of this, and I've sort of gone through my sort of stages of grief, and I've reached mostly acceptance, I think, of just that this is happening. We're going to get to this place. I don't like it. There's nothing I can do about it, whatever. I think the thing that I have not accepted yet that I hope does not happen is when we eventually get to, okay, the life rafts are full. Everybody is on the Big Ten and everybody's on the SEC, and this is where we're going. I hope that the NC States of the world, the Texas Techs of the world, that they don't just stop playing them all together, because I think that's a real possibility, is that you play a bunch of teams in the SEC and then you have, for TV reasons, you play 3 games against Big Ten teams, and you pool all your money together and you become the AFC and the NFC, and everybody else is just I hope that does not happen.
Yeah, that presumes that the SEC and the Big Ten ever want to work together, which would be the most financially beneficial thing for them to do.
Which makes me think it's going to happen.
Yeah,
yes, exactly.
Right. But it would require them to work together. And look, having dealt with those guys over the years, even though it would make them gobs of money, it still feels like
there's no such thing as even though that they would make all that money. That's literally the reason why these people wake up in the morning. I think that they'll figure out a way to kumbaya when it comes to an extra few zeros on the paycheck. Now, like the thing, it's like, and it's funny that you say that, Dave, because I haven't really spent much time considering that, because it's scary. It's like a horror film, what you just described.
That's like that.
But like,
I don't buy a lot of the apocalyptic stuff where like, oh, you're ruining the sport. If that happens, I'm not going to say I wouldn't follow college football. I still love the sport. There's a lot of awesome things, like the big games would be cool. Seeing USC and Ohio State playoffs, like all that, like okay, that's cool. But that would really, almost as much as like the death of the rivalries, which I think has been the biggest cost of realignment, that would just like, if you see these proud programs that have a lot of people that care about it, I think Texas Tech and NC State are like the best examples of this, where like a lot of people care and they've played a lot of good football. And
Iowa
good
State,
sports.
Kansas State, Washington
Baylor.
State. Yeah.
If they just all of a sudden, you guys never get to try and beat Texas, you guys never get to try and beat Clemson or whatever. Like that's
well, here's the thing too, guys, because
sucks.
anybody who listens to the show knows that I'm kind of wary of the expansion of the playoff. But the thing that I like about the expansion of the playoff is that it leaves the door open for other leftover conferences to participate in the same championship hump that, the big two are. Now, the thing I don't know is if they stop playing those teams altogether and that were to happen, do NC State and Texas Tech end up playing in their own playoff field? Is it another championship that doesn't even equate to the actual national champion? And like, to me, it's like, I kind of go back and forth on this a little bit because I'm an elitist. Like I like rooting for the best teams and like watching college football at the highest level. And I think the playoff should be four.
Ari, didn't you say TCU is gonna? You said TCU is gonna beat Georgia by double digits. Didn't you?
Yes, I did. But it's like that's what I have a hard time with. It's like on one hand, I don't want to see the best second tier teams lose to Georgia by 40, but on the other hand, I don't want them to not be involved. So it's like this push-pull between, separating the levels and wanting them to be included for the sake of the wonderful fans that root for these schools. It's like you don't have to win a national championship, and that's one thing I'm trying to learn right now. You don't have to win a national championship to, provide joy
here's
to the people who pay the tickets to go to your games.
The SEC and the Big Ten could have taken another step down the road toward that consolidation with the playoff. They didn't have to agree to this 12-team deal.
Mm-hmm.
This 12-team deal was a way to get everybody else involved, make it more of a national proposition. Because I do think it needs to be nationwide. And even though the Big Ten is on the West Coast now, it's not a nationwide sport if it's just those two leagues. Now, maybe they could add more that make it a more geographically representative thing, but it's not a nationwide sport. And you do not, because NASCAR is kind of the cautionary tale, where NASCAR is growing, and then it just shrunk back into being a regional sport. So
the thing that I have a hard time with is if it goes down to 2 major conferences, like what's the point of having a 12-team playoff?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they wouldn't. They have a 32-team league that has a 14-team playoff. The point is to make TV shows that make money.
I'm just trying to kind of like envision what that would look like, though, because if
it would look like
turn on TV on Sundays.
I'm saying like So then we're just gonna kick everybody else in the nuts then and just say sorry, thanks for
Well,
playing.
hopefully not.
Yeah,
That is hopefully what will not happen. But this is the Uncle Junior asked, do I believe is an altruistic move toward inclusion? It was about money. Yes, it was about money now, but they also could have made more money than everybody else and could have made a lot of money by having their own playoffs. An 8-team SEC tournament and an 8-team Big Ten tournament that feeds into the 4-team playoff would have made the SEC and the Big Ten more money than this 12-team thing will make them. They could have done that, and it would have taken them another step toward where we think it's going, but they didn't. So again, I'm not completely sold on them consolidating AFC, NFC. One, again, because I know these people and I can't imagine them working together. They hate each other. Each side thinks the other side's a bunch of idiots. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they start singing "Kumbaya" when the checks roll in.
I have.
It's just good to see Uncle June back in the mix. By the way,
Yeah.
I mean, there's a rough go of it at the end there. So,
I'm trying to think of like a person that I really never got along with, and I don't have any mortal enemies in real life. But if I did, and they said, "Hey, you have to work with this guy, but I will triple your salary," I'd be like, "Let's go, bring him on over. Let's have dinner together."
Yeah. I mean, I just
greed does overcome hate.
I generally think at the end of the day, because they wouldn't have to work that closely together, they just have to have their teams play. I think that's a pretty simple agreement. Hey, we're gonna have 3 crossover games a year if that happens.
I think if it consolidates
it
really
sucks
into
talking
those
about the
two.
it sucks talking about the logistics of something I don't want to happen. But
yeah, well, and again, we don't have to worry about it till at least 2034. So it's sort of like the ACC. Let's just kick the can down the road. We don't have to worry about this for a long time.
That's how it feels like for me. Like I get to savor the 4-team playoff for one more year.
Oh yeah, savor that flavor, Ari.
I'm gonna savor it.
Amazing.
And then Oklahoma State. Let's go.
Listen, guys, if getting back to the Colorado thing. And I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know what anybody's going to do. I'm not pretending to say that this team's going to jump to this league or these guys are going to stay together. But if Colorado did jump back to the Big 12, do you think the people at Sewanee immediately gas up the jet and head down to Birmingham and be like, "Listen, SEC, it can be done. Let us back in."
University of Chicago, we're starting a football program.
Listen, we're tired of pumping out economists and economists only.
We'll meet you at the Fogo de Chao. Let's get this thing going.
It's all happening. As Max Olson said on Tuesday's show, there could be a lot of emergency shows. We'll talk to you soon.